welcome. Thank you all for being here. As you can see, you're in for a really big treat today. But I want to draw your attention to these brochures, which have just come out. They have all of the events that we're going to be putting on here from summer all the way through next spring. They do not have the May events that we're doing this month, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of what's coming up. Tomorrow, our very own Allegheny Mountain String Orchestra will be performing their spring concert here, and they will be premiering a work by Brian Scarborough, who may or may not be here. Are you here, Brian? You may not be here. But I think that should be really exciting. Please come to that. Next week, next Saturday, Lucia Bregenti, an Italian pianist, will be flying here all the way from Germany. She's studying and working in Germany right now. She will put on a piano recital, and years ago, she was one of our Emerging Artist Fellows. So we're really excited to welcome her back to Garth Newell. And the final weekend in May is a 3-concert series. It'll be full of performances, dinner, dancing even, and it'll culminate in Sunday's performance of the Archduke Trio by Beethoven. So, on to today's program. We are starting with a piece by Somei Satoh. And one of the distinctive features of this piece is this repetitive pattern in the piano part. And I'm just going to have Jeannette give an example. And as you can hear, it's very meditative, and for me, I get the impression that it has no beginning or end, that it could have just been going for eternity, and this piece just lies on a continuum. And Satoh himself has long been fascinated by the concepts of space and time and how they're intertwined. And he wants listeners to experience his music as if eternal time could be experienced in one single moment. The piece is called Bifu, which has a number of different meanings, but in this particular case, it's translated as breathe. And the composer says this about it: wind is also blowing in our body. The wind in our body is called emotion. It also sometimes becomes a storm. I wish for the wind traveling in my body to remain a breeze. Distance de Fée, which translated from the French basically means ferry's distance. Ferry, not in terms of the boat, but in terms of the mystical creature. And there are wonderful, kind of luminous and magical moments in this piece. And it was written early in Takemitsu's career when he was only 20 years old. And it was a time when he was especially inspired by French composers, particularly Debussy and Olivier Messiaen. So you'll probably hear impressionistic harmonies and textures in this piece. And at times, Takemitsu liked to compare his music to a stroll in a Japanese garden, because the experience kind of unfolds at a very leisurely pace, organically, with occasional stops to admire a tree or to smell a flower or to enjoy a view. And I find that those moments of lingering and even of silence are especially powerful in this piece. So I hope you enjoy Distance de Fée by Tōru Takemitsu.
Tanaka, who is the composer of the next set of pieces, actually took over his position as the artistic director of the Yatsugatake Kogen Music Festival in Japan. And she did that in 1998, so I thought that was a cool way to link them. Karen Tanaka's music, though, is very different from Takemitsu's. She represents the sort of modern Japanese shift from the more fragile textures that often characterized earlier Japanese classical music, such as you just heard. And she actually focuses more on popular styles. She has a rather cosmopolitan education as well. She was born in Tokyo and she started her studies there, but she then moved on to study in Paris and Amsterdam. She actually had a scholarship from the Japanese government to study with Luciano Berio in Florence, Italy. And she now currently resides in Los Angeles because she has a great interest in writing for films and animations. And she also teaches at CalArts School of Music. The Techno Etudes 2 is a sequel to her Techno Etudes 1. And in it, she says there are three main factors: rhythm, speed, and energy. And that I very much liked. So the first Techno Etude is described as groovy, funky, and psychedelic. I hope you find it that way too. The second one is a study in emotion and color. And so it's rather blurry and it's very kind of meditative. The third is inspired by the trance/hip hop of early BTS. Who knows who BTS is? Good, excellent, okay. Yes, the K-pop phenomenon that is now not currently designated as hip hop, but its roots were. And in this style, the basses are boosted and emphasized. And so I will try my best to do that. I think it's a lot of fun, so I hope you enjoy it.
very excited to move on to the next part of this event. I'm happy to introduce Janet Ikeda of Washington and Lee University. She didn't want me to go into superlatives, so I promised her I would just let her introduce herself, and she will tell you everything you ever wanted to know about the Japanese tea ceremony. So please welcome Janet Ikeda.
Good afternoon, everybody. I really want to thank Garth Newell for inviting us to share a Japanese tea ceremony with you today. I'm Janet Ikeda. I'm simply a professor at Washington Lee University, where I teach Japanese language, literature. My field is actually pre-modern literature, and one very unique course on the Japanese tea ceremony, which is open to all students who wish to experience a different kind of classroom. This is somewhat an idea of our classroom at WNL. We're very fortunate, though, on our campus to have an authentic Japanese tea room. It was built in 2006, of course, funded by the university, and it was built by Seiji Suzuki, a third-generation Japanese carpenter who conveniently lives in New Jersey. So that made the logistics a little bit easier. But he has built tea rooms all over the United States, as well as private sort of Japanese rooms for individuals. The tea room was then named in 2011 by the 15th Grand Master of the Urasenke School. What does that mean? There are several schools of tea in Japan. I happen to study the Urasenke School of Tea, which really goes back about 500 years. And we're very fortunate that the Grand Master, the retired Grand Master, who just turned 99, and of course, WNO, we had to send him a video greeting. And he says it's because he drinks tea every day, a note there. But we're very happy that he named our tea room. It is an honor to have a Grand Master of a school name your tea room. It was the greatest gift I think we've received up to date. And he named it Senshin-an, and I hope all of you can visit someday, and I'd be very happy to welcome you there. Senshin-an, what does it mean? I translated it as clearing the mind abode. Senshin is to clear the heart, wash the heart, but clear all those distractions away. And the word an refers to a hut or a hermitage, or what they used to call a mountain dwelling within the city. That's what tea rooms were referred to in the 16th century. So it's where we go as students and professors. We go to retreat from all our pressing deadlines, our tests, our quizzes, papers, and all those details that make up university life. And there we can practice tea together and clear our minds of unnecessary distractions. I'm joined here today by members of the Washington and Lee University Chanoyu Tea Society, and you'll see them in action very soon. But this is a group made up of students, current students, alumni, and also non-student members, non-alumni as well. So you might be served tea by a physics professor. But I'm very grateful to their enthusiasm and support for our group because we enjoy giving demonstrations. At WNL, we host several teas throughout the year, beginning with Parents Family Weekend in October. And we do public teas. We do a very popular public Martin Luther King Day tea on that Monday, which is open to the public. And we also do a public celebration of women in the third month, of March, which of course is Girls' Day in Japan, but which is International Women's, which is a celebration of international women. And we do teas for prospective students, alumni children, community members, etc. So it's a fun club to be a part of. So I'd like to share today, in the short time I have before our demonstration, which you really want to see, is I just want to share a little bit about what the tea ceremony is, give you a brief history, because you don't want to be here all afternoon, talk a little bit about what a full tea gathering involves, And I want to give you some hints about what to look and listen for in the demonstration, which I will narrate, but I want to give you some sort of event tips here. So where to begin? Tea ceremony, that's what we call it in English. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the English because I like to think of it more by the Japanese term, which is Chanoyu. In the 16th century, it was known as Chanoyu. Cha means tea, yu means water. You're just going to see an art form of tea and hot water. That's basically it. In later centuries, it was known as chado or sado, tea and the way of. And when I say the way of, I mean capital W way, right? The way of, when we think of medieval Japan, there were a lot of way arts, which were closely connected with sort of being on a path to religious awakening. And they were paths of sort of a devotional arts. Tea has been referred to as an art form that lies between the everyday and the artistically artificial, and that's where its special nature resides. I'm just quoting some past Japanese scholars. Tea in tea, the person does not simply act upon a utensil as an object, but enters into it and incorporates its presence. So I hope you see that today. The utensils are not our narrow focus of attention. They're fun to look at, they're fun to collect as well. But the utensils really manifest themselves in and through the people who act upon them, and we will have a student host today. I want you to look for movements in Chanoyu, the grace, the economy, the rhythm. And the rhythm is a classical rhythm known as jo-ha-kyu, which we often see in the classical art, classical theatrical form of No. If you know anything about No drama, we have this jo-ha-kyu that tea also incorporates, and it's sort of like a beginning, an interlude, and then sort of a flourish or a grand sort of finale. You're going to be in two dimensions in tea. We're always moving within the present moment, but we're also caught up in the temporal flow of the moment. Chanoyu is a communal art. It is, the group comes first over the individual creation. You can do tea by yourself, but tea in itself is an art of the za. And in Japanese, in the medieval Japan, za meant the seating. It meant the place. And they love the term ichiza, that we are all one in this place. So it's this idea, the art of the ichiza, is this idea of coming together with like-minded people, coming together just for a moment, and then, as ancient tea masters did, they would record the moment. They have written documents of just very brief, not so much impressions, but really just a listing of the utensils. And of course, one Zen phrase, we're not using that here today, I'll explain the scroll later, but one important Zen phrase which I'd like you to keep in mind, which is often used as a scroll in the tea, a tea gathering, is ichigo ichie, very well known, meaning one moment, one meeting. So we could translate this as we should treasure each moment and cherish each encounter. Even if we were to do this tea tomorrow, it would be different people, it may be the same people, but you feel differently, you're wearing something different. We can never recreate this moment. So it is that quintessential carpe diem, right? We are just living in the moment. And I know from university life that we have to be reminded of that daily. Tea history, just a little bit of, I won't go on too much because I could go on, but where did tea come from? It is, the tea ceremony, the art of the tea form is unique to Japan. But of course tea came from China, the Greek continent, right? The Tang Dynasty China was like Rome. It was the center of civilization and learning, and the Japanese were a small island nation. They were getting information from China, but also they were getting information through Korea. And so we see tea coming in various forms. But I think maybe to condense this a little bit is to remember it first came in with Buddhist monks. And I always call them the first study abroad students, because they've left Japan to go to the great monasteries of China to learn about Buddhism, right? To collect sutra, to write, to copy sutras, to collect utensils, and to learn about monastic life and bring that back to Japan. Okay, and so I really want to pay credit to, in the 9th century to Buddhist priests who went to China and brought a great deal of tea culture back to Japan. And there happened to be a very enthusiastic 9th century Japanese emperor who just embraced Chinese culture. I mean, he wore Chinese dress. He named his buildings with Chinese names in Japan, because again, this is in honor of a great civilization. He had a taste for all things Chinese. But after he died, tea drinking in general just declined in popularity, and it just continued to exist in the temples. Okay? Think about why it's in the temples. One, it was a part of monastic practice, but also tea, this bitter beverage, was seen as having medicinal value. And I think 21st century science is proving they were right, because we're all encouraged to drink some form of green tea. But also, maybe this is something to keep in mind, is it was seen as an elixir of immortality. So I hope you walk away today with a little bit of sort of an elixir, a sort of idea of a magical brew. So it really will jump to the 12th century, where we have monks again going to China, Japanese monks, and they are going to the great Chan temples. Chan meaning Zen. This is the era of Zen in Japan. There are different kinds of Buddhism, okay, but we see here how it became an integral part of Zen monasteries and continues to be a part of Zen monastic practice today. For example, the practice of offering tea to the Buddha is very much a part of monastic practice. So we have monks coming back from China, planting tea gardens throughout Japan, but reviving this sort of taste for this Chinese beverage. Okay, but I'd like to say that what happens is that tea starts to, I always say in class that it jumps over the monastic walls and starts to permeate Japanese society. Because Buddhist monks are also, you know, the literati, the well-educated, they're all going to poetry gatherings with the aristocrats, with the merchant class, burgeoning merchant class. But we're beginning to see tea becoming what it is, I think, in today is a popular art form, something that you would get together to have fun. It was used as a part of big banquets and entertainment. And so we have tea during this period. I'm thinking of the 15th, 14th century, in huge rooms and kind of raucous parties and prizes for, they would have tea tasting and see if you could, like wine tasting, can you guess what region of Japan this tea came from? So it really took three phenomenal tea masters of the 16th century to bring it to this idea of tea as a way art, the way of tea. So I'll talk mainly, just mention briefly, the last tea master, Sen no Rikyu of the 16th century, probably the most famous, took this simple way of drinking tea and made it into sort of a pursuit of beauty, a pursuit of wabi, which I'll talk about. What is this idea of wabi that we often hear about, and giving it a depth that it had not before, that it was simply sort of part of the rules and etiquette of Zen temples, but it took someone like Sen no Rikyu to bring to what we call the grass hut style of tea, so-on style, right? We were beginning to see it move from a very large room to being enjoyed in a very small room. So yes, in Japan I have been in a 2-mat tea room. And it's about the size of a mat. Not really a great size for teaching students, because I don't think we could all sort of cram in there. So I was very happy at Washington and Lee, we have a 6-mat tea room. But you can see how it would be quite radical for people of elevated rank to sort of squeeze themselves into a tea room. We also see the aesthetic, this wonderful appreciation for Chinese wares, now being complemented with things that were made in Japan. So things that we would see as wabi, almost misshapen, right? We don't have the bright colors, we don't have the perfect wheel-thrown objects, some of them almost looked warped, but this became a desired aesthetic of tea, to combine the kind of pristine, symmetrical utensils of China with the burgeoning sort of tea aesthetic in Japan. Today we are using a kaibu. It's actually a match set. And the inspiration of this does come from Chinese utensils. These would all, the original ones would all be made in bronze, and they would be used on a very formal stand. We are using a Japanese version of that, and also a gift from the Grandmaster who gave us our tea room name. So we want to think of tea as an escape, that we're all escaping sort of the worldliness of our everyday lives, and we're trying to find some kind of tranquil moment. And this makes more sense when you think of tea in the 16th century, which was a time of great warfare in Japan. Just warlords. It wasn't a civil war between side A and B. It was many, many warlords, known as daimyo, who were vying for power of Japan, to take over Japan. And I always remember my graduate school advisor, I always paid tribute to Martin Kokai, who said, because he studied the monastic, the temples of this period, but he always said, in the 16th century in Japan, you could not rule Japan by horseback, on horseback alone. You also had to have this combination of the civil arts and the arts of war, right? You had to know poetry, you had to know the classical note theater, you had to know tea. You had to be a connoisseur of utensils. And so, of course, it is this culture, this elite warrior culture that we see in the 6th century, which promoted Chanoyu and its growth. And many of the fine collections of tea utensils that are now in museums came from these warlords' private collections. And of course, they would have their private tea master to teach them, but also to entertain their retainers, right? So the next thing I wanted to do was to talk a little bit, so that's kind of tea in a nutshell there, but I also wanted to share with you a little bit about why you study tea, or why did I begin a study of tea. So I always say I did the 4-year study abroad gap, right? So just between my junior and senior year of college, I just happened to go to Japan for 4 years. And then my father, who was so upset, ordered me to come home. So I always say beware, but beware of where paths may lead you. But I think what I learned, it's simple for those of you in the audience who know this, but our students are still learning this, that as much as they plan, life is not always a straight trajectory. It's not, oh, I'm going to go from A to B and B to C and C to D and my life's just going to work out. And I see people shaking their heads, right? We all end up in different places. And so I'm glad I took that little moment to jump off the sort of Shinkansen, the bullet train, for a while. So I went to Japan first to study Japanese. I'm Japanese American, but I grew up in the States, of course, was born and raised here. And I went and I did the serious language study at what's called the Stanford Center, which was then in Tokyo. And then I said, wouldn't it be neat to stay another year, At the end of the study abroad year, you always think, oh, I'd like to stay another year. So I applied for another fellowship, and I happened to have studied tea at the University of Hawaii. I'm not from Hawaii, but my mother was from there. And so I received one of the first scholarships to study Oda Senkei tea as a university student, and I went for 1 year, and I just stayed 2 more years. So altogether, 4 years. And my father said, our dream is just for you to have a BA in life. Just come back and just finish that BA. So I did. And I will say, I went on to write an honors thesis, and I went on to grad school at Princeton. But my one regret in life is that my father did not live long enough to see the beautiful tea room at WNL. and to meet the wonderful students that I've had over the years. Because don't we all want to say to our parents, I told you so, right? So anyways, because he was quite worried about me being there in Japan. So what do we train? I want to sort of let you know what a formal tea gathering is and why we're not doing it today, because it would take years and years of practice on all of our parts. But I want you to know, why do you spend your lifetime? Why did I spend 3 years? This is what I had to explain to my father. Why did I spend 3 years in Japan learning tea, and I feel I only saw the tip of the iceberg. And I think it was partly my fault. I would write these letters home, and they became the joke of the family. I would write about how we would learn at the tea school, the traditional tea school. I was in Kyoto at the headquarters, and we would water beautiful Japanese garden, but then you had to go out with a towel and sop up all the water so it looked just right. So the big joke in the family became, well, she's off in Japan washing rocks. Right, we're not really sure what she's doing, but she's washing a lot of rocks over there. But to try to explain how you can spend your life learning tea or teaching tea is that really the most formal tea gathering, which we're not doing today, would be about 4 to 4.5 hours. And you have to be very experienced to host this. It would take months to plan. Before we left the tea school, we all did a graduation sort of exercise or a formal tea gathering. But also you have to be equally experienced to even attend. Simply to be a guest at this tea gathering, you would have to study so much. The timing of the greetings, what to do when, how to handle many utensils. And I think the biggest challenge is how to sit Japanese style, Seiza style, with your knees tucked underneath, for 4.5 hours. It takes a little bit of perseverance. But I just wanted to walk you briefly through a tea gathering, a full tea gathering. But we would all arrive, and the part one is that we would already, we're going to have a meal and watch somebody put charcoal in the brazier. That is why we are gathered for the first part. We already know the order of the guests, who's the designated first guest. It's terrible to be designated first guest. In the last few years, I've been to 2 chaji, one at the Zen Center in San Francisco and then one in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, and I hated being first guest because I had to spend months kind of reviewing and knowing what to do when. It's quite an honor, but it takes a lot of review. And we would enter a small room, and if we're wearing Western dress, we would change our socks. If we were wearing kimono, we would change our tabi, or footwear. And timing would be everything. When to move through the garden, when to wash our hands, etc. But the tea room garden, the garden outside the tea room is very, very special. It's not just a Japanese garden. It's not a strolling garden. It's not a Zen garden. It's not one of these marvelous Japanese gardens where they call shakke. They borrow landscape from, like Mount Fuji in the back. Or in Kyoto, to borrow the scenery of Mount Hiei in the background. It's very simple. Simple plants, rocks, and a low water basin. And we would move to the garden. We'd all be sitting in the arbor. And for a chaji, it would only be 3 to 5 people. This is not big tea gatherings that you see in Japan. And everybody would be experienced tea people. And we'd be sitting in the arbor, in the garden, and the host, without a word, can be heard pouring water into a low basin outside the tea room. Then he or she would approach, and we would all quietly bow. And I think what I love about teaching tea, and what has become so important to me, is how nonverbal it is. That maybe it is all about observing and listening, which are good skills to have. So we wait for our host to retreat after the bow, and then we make our way to the tea room. And the gathering is very much about purification. And it's just not cleaning things to clean them because they're already clean, right? Because we're clearing our minds. We're clearing that dust of the world, right? So when you see the host start to wipe the utensils with a silk cloth, it's not because they're dirty. It's because she is also clearing her thoughts, and we are doing the same. But before you enter tea room, you actually go to this low water basin, and there's a way to do everything, how to handle the ladle, etc. And you cleanse your hands and your mouth. And then you crawl into the tea room. Now, we do not have this particular architectural feature at WNL in our tea room, but usually there is a crawling in entrance about 3 feet by 3 feet. And it's intentional because the architecture of the tea room instructs us, and it instructs us in humility. Everyone who enters has to bow and crawl into this space. Doesn't sound so radical in 21st century, but it was pretty radical in 16th century Japan, especially if you were a ruling warlord. What? I've got to crawl and go into this tea room. And another radical thing is that you had to hand your sword over to your retainer. Or in Japan, if you go there today, there will be tea rooms where there are still sword racks. So you can leave your sword out, because there's no room for that in the tea room. And then we will see a scroll. As we all enter, we'll see a scroll in the dim light of the tea room. And the host will explain the significance of the scroll. And I have chosen this scroll, a very favorite scroll of ours today, which is, I'll read it in Japanese. The scroll says, Kanza shite shofu kiku. The calligraphy is by a Zen priest of a sub-temple of Daitokuji, one of the big Zen monasteries, training monasteries in Kyoto. And it means, I guess you could translate it in various ways, sitting still and listening to the sound of the wind blowing through the pine trees. And I think music is so much about listening. How do we listen not only with our ears, but with our heart? And a leading scholar of Zen phrases, Haga Koshiro, said, the first two characters mean to sit with a quiet heart. And this can mean sitting anywhere, in the stillness of a meditation hall, or a tea room, a high-rise building, or a concert hall. And the pine wind is a poetic term. The pine wind can refer to just about any sound in nature, but in Chanoyu, in tea, the pine wind refers specifically to the sound of the kettle boiling, the murmur of the kettle. The most important thing he advises us is that we should listen with our heart. And that if you listen with your entire being, then you can hear the breathing of the universe, is what he advises us. So first we're going to see, and what does the scroll, the role of the scroll in a tea, is to, it is a theme. So once you have an explanation of the scroll, that is the theme of the gathering. And it's for you to take home, it's for you to contemplate. It's sort of your mantra for the day. Okay. So in order to make a good bowl of tea, you must build a fire. So yes, there is a charcoal ceremony. We do not do this at WNL because we are in a university museum, and we're not allowed to build fires there. So of course in Japan as well, there are buildings that don't allow charcoal, so you have electricity to fuel your kettle. But the charcoal ceremony is amazing. It has specially cut charcoal, it has special utensils, and you really get to enjoy sort of the building of the fire from the ground up. And then you would have a kaiseki meal. If you've heard of kaiseki, the Japanese term refers probably to the most elegant form of Japanese cuisine. Yes, you can go to a kaiseki restaurant, but it usually starts at $300 a person. So it is known for, having small portions, beautifully presented, and of course very seasonal. But let's remember that kaiseki roots began with tea. Kaiseki means a rock in the bosom of the kimono, because Zen monks practicing, long hours in the monastery in order to stave off hunger would put a warm rock sort of in the bosom area of their kimono. And so the meal should be sparse. And it is quite exciting to learn kaiseki. It is an art in itself, but it's very prescribed, the timing of each dish, and appreciating. What I love is the synchronization of watching the first guests as they remove the lids of the bowls. Everybody does this together, and the smell of whatever is inside the bowl sort of pervades the room. And then of course, you have one dish that you always have a dish that goes well with sake. And again, we pronounce it sake in the United States, but the correct pronunciation is sake, or sake, which is rice wine. So I always say you have to know how to hold your tea, but you also have to know how to hold your osake, because there's quite a lot of drinking during this meal. And then there's an intermission, so you get to go out into the garden. The host replaces the scroll with flowers. It is common in Japan to do an abbreviation, so I put both together. But when you come back to the tea room, the scroll is gone, there's only the flowers, and the flowers represent the spirit of the host. So the flowers today are from my garden, but they represent our feeling today. They're always very simple, they're always seasonal, right? And they represent sort of simple beauty. And then, just to sort of wrap up here, part 2 is what you would come for. Would be a serving of thick tea, and this would be one bowl shared with everyone. And again, you have to be an experienced tea person to know how to take this tea. Of course, with COVID, they had to revise all that and change a 500-year-old tradition and make a different kind of procedure. But then after thick tea, you would have thin tea. And so we are doing sort of the last 15 minutes of the formal gathering, right? Where you would have sweets again, and then you would have a preparation of thin tea. Everybody gets their own individual bowl. And the tea is, again, a very high quality of matcha or powdered tea. And again, with thin tea, it's just less tea, more water. Thick tea, it's a lot more tea and less water. It's a little bit like drinking a green gravy, which we're not doing today. And then the departure is always very special for me for any tea, and I find myself doing it at WNL. But after you've done this 4.5-hour tea gathering, and everybody, all your guests leave through that crawling in entrance, they crawl out, is that you sit there alone in the tea room, the host, and it's called zanshin, this kind of lingering heart, this idea of sort of savoring the moment after all your guests leave. I guess it's like when the concert is over and when you're just alone with yourself. So I often find myself doing that. So I know we're going to move to the tea demonstration, but I want to leave some poems with you. Tea has a lot of didactic poetry. I teach Japanese poetry, so no, these are not the greatest poems of the medieval period that you would find in anthology. The Japanese also use the traditional 31-syllable waka form, right, to teach. And I just wanted to share some of these with you before we start. The first one, of course, when you enter the way of tea, you are your own best teacher. I think that's a lesson in life. I think that's a lesson for college, all right? I think that every first-year student should recite that. Rikyu's, the Senno Rikyu, this great tea master of the 16th century, had an equally wonderful grandson known as Sotan, a favorite of ours. I know the students like to talk about him, but he said, Chanoyu is conveyed through the mind, through eye and ear, without a single stroke of the brush. And Senno Rikyu left almost nothing in writing. He did not leave treatises, he did not leave diaries, right? He left records of tea gatherings, but he left almost nothing. Another poem, a favorite, Sotan said, if asked the nature of Chanoyu, say it's the sound of windblown pines in a painting. Think about that. If asked the nature of Chanoyu, what's Chanoyu? We also have a little bee over there. Say it's the sound of windblown pines in a painting. So tea should engage all your senses. You must enter a painting. How do you enter a one-dimensional painting? Is that you have to go beyond the one-dimensional. You have to go beyond the intellectual understanding of tea, that the sound of the wind in the pines connotes depth. And so hopefully we will be able to bring a little of that to you today. We are all training, the students are training, we're all learning and relearning. And so we will be presenting tea in a little bit more of a modern style. This is called table tea, which is Ryū dana. But I think if you know Japanese history, around 1868, the West entered Japan. Of course, they entered in the earlier centuries, mainly traders and missionaries, but Japan went into 2.5 centuries of self-imposed isolation. I think to not be colonized by the West. So it's known as the Edo period. Of course, it was a flourishing of arts and so many other things when a nation turns inward on itself. And what we see, though, is 1868, when they opened to the West, is they had to accommodate Westerners. And so they very conveniently developed a kind of table tea, which we thought would be easier to see and that you might enjoy today. So why don't we go ahead and start our demonstration. And we're going to ask one person to be our first guest, but everybody will get the same sweets and tea after we're done. So do we have any volunteers? You can just sit in your chair. You don't have to come and sit Japanese style. Okay. Oh. Would you like to be? Okay. So we have our first guest. Sorry, I just saw her hand up go first. And you could just sit there. I think that would be easiest. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to go here to the side. So did you see that? Oh, it was the person in the back there. Could you raise your hand so they can see you? Thanks. So everybody will get the same sweets and tea, and I'll explain the sweets. So we did these special orders on sweets. So we actually have 3 students today. We have Ashley Nimi with the tray. We have Ashley Shaw with who will be doing the procedure. But we've been practicing together. We actually did this tea for our Parents Family Weekend tea. And then we have another student, Eli Bradley, who's a graduating senior. I don't like it when they graduate. So our host enters. And just a general rule, when someone bows, you just bow back. This shows that she is going to start the procedure. She's coming in with a tea bowl and a lacquered container, which contains the powdered tea. The match set it consists of what she just put to the side, which will be used for wastewater. When you rinse the bowl, you need somewhere to discard the water. And the small napkin ring-like object is a lid rest for the kettle lid. So each movement is very deliberate in tea. So you notice the host has on the waist cord a silk cloth called a fuksa. I don't like when it's translated as napkin because you never dab your mouth with it. It's really a purifying cloth. In training, we use red ones, we use purple ones, but they come in all different colors. But it's to purify. So we're going to purify the tea container first. This particular shape is known as a Natsume. Of course, there are hundreds of styles of tea containers. And now we're going to use the silk cloth to purify the tea scoop, known as the chashaku, which is made of a single piece of bamboo. Tea masters often carve their own tea scoops. Tea scoops made by Zen priests or the Grand Master usually have poetic names. And you'll notice she took out another bamboo utensil, which is known as a tea whisk, a chasen. So you don't really stir tea, you whisk it. This is another utensil made of bamboo. A lot, of course, is made as bamboo. It was very commonly grown and easy to harvest. And this is a ladle that she's going to use for hot water and cold water, but first hot water. So she puts the lid on the lid rest. These utensils, most of them were a gift from the 15th generation Grand Master. And the kettle is in the shape of Mount Fuji. Or as our school children like to say, when we say, oh, what does that remind you of? One child said, the Liberty Bell. So I went with it, that's fine. So it's the sound of water. It might be hard to hear, but we do have the wind blowing through the pines here with the kettle. And inspecting the tea whisk, which again is clean, right? Oftentimes it's a new one, a brand new one, but she's doing that for you. So that you can again discard all your thoughts of the day and just enter into this tea room space. The white cloth. I don't know if you noticed, she had a white cloth in that tea bowl, and that is used to purify the bowl. There is a lot of speculation, it hasn't been proven, but in 16th century Japan, we have a lot of Jesuit priests, along with English traders. And there is, I knew a professor at LaSalle University. I used to go teach a class there when I was in grad school. I would drive down from Princeton, and he believes, and many others believe, that this idea of cleansing the tea bowl comes from cleaning the chalice in the Mass. So she's saying to the first guest, and then we'll say it to all of you, you may have your sweets. So go ahead and have your sweets. And the thing with tea sweets is that you would eat them all first, and then put your paper away. You can fold it, throw it away, so that you can have the tea. It's not like a little bit of sweets, a little bit of tea, you know, like cake and coffee. You would have all the sweets, and then you would be prepared for the tea. The tea, yes, it's just powdered green tea of very high quality and hot water, so it's not sweet. It is bitter, but didn't I say it might be an elixir for immortality, so it'll be good for you. It does have a lot of caffeine. For those of you who have some issues with caffeine, you want to be careful. Students love caffeine. And I always notice that the class always becomes a lot livelier after everyone has tea. So. Now she just opened another utensil there. What's it doing sitting there? It has cold water. Occasionally, if the kettle is boiling too rigorously, you would add cold water. It's not, so she's just going to go on and prepare the tea. So what is Chanoyu, the art of Chanoyu? It's tea and hot water, and that's basically what. So you notice this very elegant way of handling the ladle. Again, this all has to be learned. There are three different styles of placing the ladle on the kettle, and they come from the Japanese art of kyudo, which is the Japanese art of archery. In a small tea room, all these sounds are just amplified. You know, the sound of the kettle, the sound of the wind blowing through the pines, the water being poured into the bowl, the whisking. And so she's going to put the tea bowl out on the side table, and then I think Ashley will come serve it. But everybody take a look at the design. She's turning it to point the design to all of you, and it has a warrior's helmet. Because in the month of May, specifically May 5th, and we just did a tea for alumni children, but May 5th is Tango no Seku, which is known as Boys' Day in Japan. The national holiday has been converted to Children's Day, but in the traditional calendar it is Boys' Day, and you have this motif of the warrior's helmet. You have the carp streamers, because the carp in Chinese legend, a lot of legends of course come from China, the carp perseveres and climbs up the waterfall, and at the top becomes a dragon. So we're praying for sort of the prosperity and good health of our children. And so maybe what we could do is get a tea bowl from the back. Sorry, I forgot. Maybe we could bring a tea bowl from the back and show how to drink the tea. Okay, so you'll notice that tea bowls often have a very prominent front, correct? Even if it was a tea bowl without any design, and you have tea bowls that have, the tea bowls without any design are actually the more serious bowls that you would use for thick tea. You would still consider that bowl the front. So whenever you're served tea, okay, so when you're served tea, it comes to you with the front towards you, correct? Okay, so first what you would do is you would put it on your left palm, and then cradle it in your right hand, like this. Open up your thumb, right? And we give gratitude. Gratitude. And it's gratitude for the people who made the tea, the person who made the tea, the people who grew the tea. And that's what I love about this art form as well, the bowing, the etiquette, the gratitude for life. And believe me, during COVID, that was very important, and I did manage to teach a tea course during COVID. And then now you turn the bowl twice clockwise. And that's becoming harder and harder to explain to this younger generation. I actually have a big, elementary school clock. And then you turn the bowl clockwise as they look at their digital watches. And so the design is away from you because you don't want to drink from the beautiful front of the bowl. And then again, you put it on your left palm, you extend your right hand, open your thumb, put your thumb back. Yep, right. Okay, that's the safest position, and then you would enjoy the tea. For some of you, if it's the first time, if you just want to take a sip and you don't want to drink it all, that's fine. Students often ask for a second bowl because they have a paper to write. So, they need that caffeine fix. It has a very clean, kind of earthy, grassy taste to it, I think, right? Because it is just tea ground up. It's picked at the best time of the year, it's dried in a very special way, and then it's ground. So think of what? Earl Grey tea or tea you had this morning. I assume you do not chomp on the leaves, right? You don't open the little tea bag, or you don't brew tea and then eat the leaves. You are eating the leaves. You're eating the whole things, right? So it is it is perishable. When you open a can of tea, you do have to keep it in the refrigerator or the freezer, right? And there's no prescribed way to drink. I mean, some people say you have to drink it in 3 sips. You don't. But something that is kind of important among tea people is that you slurp at the end. You want to give that last slurp, and it's sort of, again, these sounds in the tea room, like, it tells your host, you enjoyed the tea. I can, the timing of the next bowl of tea. So everyone will be able to taste of that. Sometimes when we ask children, we'll give them little portions. And I remember one group of school children, we said, what does the tea taste like? And someone said, sushi. So I don't know, maybe that's the only Japanese food they knew. So it doesn't taste like sushi. So some say spinach, right? And that's a little bit closer. So why don't we go ahead and I guess we'll get that tea bowl back from you, because what's important, and this will be faster, is that we actually, a part of the procedure is to watch her clean up. And I know it sounds kind of strange, like if you had everybody over for some fabulous dinner party and then you said, follow me to the kitchen and watch me load up the dishwasher, right? We don't do that, right? Everybody leaves. But in tea, it's very important to sort of watch her clean up as well and put everything away. It takes less time. So of course we're going to start with hot water. Because one thing in tea is that the first guest really is the honored guest. And if the first guest wants the second bowl, or the third guest wants a second bowl, or if everybody wants a second bowl, she would just be busy making tea up here forever. So after she puts in hot water, she's going to discard it. We'll all listen for the sound. And we learn the greetings in Japanese so that we can go anywhere in the world, in any tea room. There's a tea room in Beijing, tea room in Rome. A good friend of mine teaches in Germany, Egypt, that you can go anywhere in the world and use these very simple Japanese phrases. And she said, I will humbly start to close up. So it's sort of with your permission. Okay. And you close up by putting cold water into the bowl. So this is symbolic that she's going to put everything away. And we do, we savor this moment, right? This zanshin, this idea that we're never gonna, we might not see this ensemble of utensils used again. So we're kind of savoring this. And she does a very simple, right? The opening was more elaborate, but the closing is much simpler. Puts away the cloth. Puts away the tea whisk, the chasen. And she's just going to put the rinse water down below so she can take it out later. We do wipe the tea scoop though. Tea scoops, as I said, if they're by a prominent person, this is just a practice tea scoop, but they would have a poetic name. And I think that's what drew me to tea. I love the poetic names. They can come from Zen phrases, but they often come from many of the great poetic anthologies. They can come from haiku. Haiku is a much later art form. And so I thought a perfect name for this season would be based on a haiku. So I'm going to name it Alba. Some people know that as the name of our late dog, but it actually comes from a haiku poem. And it goes, maybe Alba, I wrote it down here, but sort of all in front of me, green, green leaves. Isn't that what it's like? It's just so green outside. The cry of the cuckoo, which is a kind of a hototogisu, which is associated. So nothing but green leaves before my eyes. I hear the cry of the mountain cuckoo, the yama hototogisu, hatsu gatsuo, and I taste my first bonita, which is a kind of fish. Right? It's a very famous haiku poem. So I thought green leaves would be appropriate. And speaking of haiku, I hope you're inspired by probably one of the most famous haiku by Basho, well-known haiku poet, is the one, of course, An Ancient Pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of water. And that's what tea people love. This moment, when you take cold water and replenish the hot kettle, tea people live for that moment. They love that sound. I might say that there are hundreds of these procedures. So we only do a few at WL. In the class, in the 12-week class, we only do one. And then in our tea club, we do all kinds of variations. So what is the goal? And I think the best quotation comes from an article that we read, that the goal is not the mastery of the art. The goal is the mastery of self. And that's what tea is all about. It's about mindfulness. It's about mastery of self. It is about gratitude, right, and humility. And I think those are the takeaway messages. So as she leaves, we're fondly looking at all these utensils, right? That we're not going to see them for a while. We may not see them for years. A wonderful tea is to have like a friend from your tea school days or someone you've known for years come, after 10, 20, oh my gosh, 30 more years, and then you bring out a bowl that they had given you a long time. And it's just a wonderful moment. And now she's coming in with something else to finish. And what's in this kind of ceramic pitcher? This is kind of the mystery and magic of tea, I think, is that she has to refill the cold water container. Remember, she used quite a bit of cold water for the bowl. She used some to replenish the kettle. And the idea in tea is that after you finish, you clean up so that you are always ready to start the procedure all over again. You are always ready for tea. Many, many anecdotes about Senno-rikyu, traveling with a disciple, and Senno-rikyu turns to the disciple and says, "Did you leave your kettle on at home?" Right? They're going on a trip. And he says, "Oh no, I didn't." And Senno-rikyu orders him to go home because you should always be ready for a guest. And just one last, again, you have to complete everything. The wastewater container, rinse water container has been cleaned in the back, and now she will put it together with the matching set. So she's ready for tea. She'll just step out a moment, but she'll be coming in for her final bow, and if everybody could bow to her, that would be great. Thank you, Ashley. Very beautiful. I think you saw the grace and the economy of movement in her procedure. She's been studying for a while. What I'm sad about is, of these three students, one is graduating, and the other two are going to study abroad. So, but I can't complain, right? But I hope not for 4 years. I hope they come back. So I want you to relax and enjoy. You're all going to get some sweets. I'm going to explain what they are. Everybody gets the same sweets. One is ordered from, well, two. The one that's in a little package is from Minamoto Kichoan, a wonderful tea sweet shop. But you can order because they have one in New York on Madison Avenue. And they have one in San Francisco. And if you do mail order, it comes in about 2 days. And that is a wonderful strawberry mochi. Because of shipping between, or flights between Japan and the US, they don't have everything in stock. So we were lucky to get the strawberry mochi. But it's, again, made by a professional and old tea sweet shop. The little rind you see there, it looks a little bit like a citrus rind, right? It's not an orange, and it's not a lime, and it's not a lemon, and it's not a tangerine, because it's the best taste you'll ever taste is a yuzu, which is a type of Japanese citron. Very hard to buy here, right? Very expensive. You can buy one for about $5 in Japan, but used in sweets, used in kaiseki, right? It has the most unique citrus taste that students love. And when we go study abroad, they go around looking for everything. There are yuzu drinks. They even put it in shampoo. They put it, right? But there's kind of a yuzu boom in Japan right now. And then the colorful sweet, right? Whether it's green or white or pink, it all tastes the same. These are pressed sweets from Japan. They're called dried sweets, higashi. They are made specifically for the tea ceremony. These sweets are not things that you take on a hike and like pop in your mouth on the way up the mountain. These are all specifically for a tea gathering. And that is a pressed sweet made with a very fine quality of rice flour, very difficult to get in the US, and then a very fine quality of sugar. You'll notice the sweets are just sweet, right? They'll have some taste. There's a little bit of the strawberry. The yuzu has a taste. But again, you don't want something too strong because what is the main treat? Is the tea. But because the tea is bitter, it will be bitter, right? You need a little bit of sweet. So the trick is eat all your sweets, and then your tea will come. So you can wait, you can eat slowly. They'll be coming, they're busy whisking in the back there. They have to whisk each bowl of tea. And I wanted to say one more thing, and I'm happy to open it up for questions. Because of this venue, I started thinking about this last year when we thought about this. I was thinking about the importance of another Japanese concept called ma. Ma means an interval between something spatial or temporal. It means a gap or an opening. Ma is referred to a room. A Japanese room is called a nihonma, Japanese style room. Ma, though, is also a rest in music. It's a pause between notes or sounds. And I love the character for ma. Of course, the characters, Japanese use 3 scripts. I love to teach first year Japanese, but we learn 3 scripts. We learn 2 sort of syllabaries that were created in Japan, but we use Chinese characters. And the character for ma, you have to picture this, is a gate. It has a gate, and then in the middle of the gate is the character for sun. And it's this idea, this visual image of light shining through a gate or the door, or a door. So ma, even though we think of it as a rest or a pause in music, is not about emptiness. We want to let the light shine through. In the No Theater, they talk about ma as negative space. Negative space, but it's still an empty. Sort of that space just before a performance or after a performance, right? Sometimes we tend to place all the emphasis on the performance, right? But what I like about ma is that we're looking for that emptiness before and after. Ma is also referred to the sacred space that you might find around a Shinto shrine, the indigenous belief system of Japan. Ma is also used as a space between poems because there is a classical art form called linked verse. And so I thought today we would really think about ma not as a negative space, but really what scholars have described as tea is this ma that we experience today is the art of betweenness, which is something you want to wrap your head around. I want to make sure I don't get. So this betweenness, this experience of betweenness sort of permeates Japanese culture. It's the world of shadows and shadings, the moon and the mist, clouds and haze, just when you think of looking at Japanese art in many ways. And it's a world that you sort of empty yourself into. It's a way of seeing or sensing the world in a different way. So I think it's a world in between. And it's a little bit like calligraphy. We tend to focus on the brush strokes. But you know, when you look at Japanese painting or calligraphy, it's the ma, the spaces, the white spaces that are so important as well. And so I thought that would be kind of an interesting point to bring. And we use very sort of, we didn't use a lot of sort of wabi utensils, distorted utensils. Those are things that are a little bit harder to transport because they usually are the more expensive utensils. But one thing, students always laugh when I see this, but tea is about, it comes from a Japanese phrase, the beauty of imperfection. That's what they love, something being imperfect. And that, I think, is what tea is all about. And another wonderful way to define this sense of finding wabi in tea is looking for beauty in things that everyone else overlooks. So watch the stand here.
Janet, will you instruct us again?
Oh, okay. So maybe we have, okay. Let me see if I think there might be a roll back here. Oh, yeah, there is. Okay. So I'm going to put the mic down. So you're served with the bowl with the front towards you. If it doesn't have a certain front, it has a symbolic front. So if you could put it on your left palm and extend your right hand, because this is just the safest way to handle a bowl, is gratitude. Sort of bowing, right? And then put your hand, think of this as a clock. I think I'm okay here, right? And then at 3 o'clock, put your fingers at 3 o'clock and turn it 180 degrees so that the beautiful side is on the other side and you can drink from the back. But then again, go into holding position, open your hand. After you turn it, be sure to open your right hand and just enjoy your tea. And if you'd like to slurp it at the end, you can. And again, if you don't want to drink it all, that's fine. It's just a taste of matcha. There are different qualities and different names for matcha, and I buy from a store run by a tea friend called Matcha and More. But the tea we're drinking today has a beautiful name. It's called Ao Arashi, and it means green storm. It's perfect for this time of year. But to tell the truth, I use it all year. But like grades of wine, right, you can buy very, very expensive grades of tea. But we like Ao Arashi, green storm.
Is that online that you buy it?
Pardon me?
Is it online?
It is. Wonderful matcha and more. When I started teaching this class, I'm going to say maybe 2001, I had to send physical yen to a friend in Japan to buy tea. It is so nice. Credit card, yes. Everything has become so much easier. I love online shopping. But if you're in New York, do go to Minamoto Kichoan, this sweet store. It's wonderful. And of course there are tea rooms at museums. And before we built our tea room, I went to various universities and museums to sort of get an idea of what we'd like. I think we are unique in having a 3-credit course. There are only a handful of places, or very few places that still do this. But the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco has a very nice tea room. There's, of course, one in the Japanese Embassy in Washington. Some universities that have tea rooms, of course, the University of Hawaii has a whole tea house in a beautiful Japanese garden. And the East-West Center, but the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, has a Japanese complex, and a colleague there teaches tea. And we've sent students there as graduate students. And they're able to continue their tea practice, oftentimes majoring in something completely different. A tea student just got her PhD in organic chemistry, but she loves tea. She loves tea. And that's what I love about the tea course. It just attracts students who are there. Of course, I get our majors or minors, but over half of the class are students who are just drawn, I think, to the stillness. They just want to slow down. They just want to explore. And then there's the 1 or 2 students who signed up for it, like not knowing at all what they were saying. And I love the look on their face, like when they walk in. Right. So it's a joy. It's a joy to teach. And what I realized which I didn't realize at the beginning, is that, oh, this is this esoteric art, right? Of 500 years, and I'm teaching all these different elements of Japanese culture. And what I realize is that I think for me, and I'll do a little preview, is that for me it's teaching about just life. It really is. About being able to take a poem or a scroll and applying it to their lives. That this is your search. This is your journey. This is what you're here at college for. It's not the tests, it's not the quizzes. It's not mastery of the art. It's not getting A on everything. It's mastery of self. It's coming out of a 4-year liberal arts education and knowing who you are. I don't think we talk about that enough. And so I'm a little bit braver these days in being able to talk about those various things. And I guess I should, let me make sure I get the correct name. Eli, who is graduating, Eli Bradley right here, this tall young man, is also a composer and musician. And he just composed a piece, the second movement from Suite for the Blue Ridge Sunset, where he plays piano, and a 4th-year student, a senior at WNO, plays violin. And I will soon release it because they have given me permission to use it for my podcast. So I took a podcasting workshop, and of course I'm like everybody else. I got hooked on podcasts with Serial. But I just started a podcast, which takes a lot of time, but I love it because it makes me really focus my thoughts on what I want to say. And so I have a podcast called Wind in the Pod. Yes, it is a play on Wind in the Pines. And it is called Through a Tea Room Window. And I just want to share what I'm learning from my students. What are we really learning when we are learning about tea? It often isn't about tea at all. Are there any questions or reactions? Everybody does look a little livelier, but that could just be me. Any questions about the tea or anything I said? Oh, yes.
Is this something that people can learn about as part of their regular education, or is it just a small percentage of people who
It's,
are?
I think because it is part of their cultural heritage, everyone knows about tea, but it's a little bit like violin. In the West, does everybody take violin lessons? We don't. So there are people who dedicate and go for weekly lessons. They don't come to the tea school where you dedicate your life. I mean, that was, 9 to 5 every day for 3 years. But people, going home from work will go to their evening tea lesson, right? And then you have dedicated tea teachers who are doing this just for people who study it as a hobby. So I would say that. I think yes, but I would say my students, after I take the 12-week course, yes, they know more about tea than the person on the street in Japan. They absolutely do know more.
The whisking, I'm curious, first of all, is there a particular direction that you need to whisk? And then also, like, how vigorous and how long, like, what, is there a particular idea or?
I don't know if there's a mental image, but the whisking, thank you, because it's not stirring. I always, think of the clock again. You're whisking from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. You're not going like this, like you're going to beat up some batter, right? It is 12 to 6. It is not that easy because it is all in the wrist. And I know that when the Grand Master sent us to Tokyo to make 700 bowls of tea in one day, which that was, of course, I was a lot younger. So, but again, and then there also is this idea of at the end slowing down. And in our tea schools are all different. We should have a nice foam on top. There are some tea schools where they whisk the tea, but they don't want the foam on top. Again, these are not like deep philosophical differences, right? But you do want to envision sort of whisking the tea and sort of putting your spirit into it. But what I like is the end. You should draw the character no, which is a hiragana character. So this is only one theory a tea teacher once shared with me. When you wipe the bowl, you also write 2 other syllables, E and D. So that doesn't make sense, but this is the syllable E, and this is the syllable B. So then you saw her when she was cleaning the bowl. So if you put those three syllables together, E, no, D, it means to pray. So it was a nice explanation, again, for one of the high P teachers, but everybody sort of has their own sort of ideas about this. Well, I hope you enjoy, oh yes.
The kettle, I'm just curious exactly how does that work? It just looks from here like a ceramic vessel. So is it actually heating or is it just heat something hot?
So in the traditional method, it would have sculpted ash, which takes hours, sculpted ash, and then we would have embers of special charcoal. And tea charcoal is very special. You have to wash. I also wash charcoal. That was hard to explain to my father as well. That and the rocks. But you wash this. We don't do that. So there's a heating device underneath, right, which looks like charcoal. It's actually quite ingenious. So, and there's a cord that goes underneath. So, but I hope you might have been able to smell a little bit because I put it on right before the concert began. That there was some incense in the air. And this is the season where we use sandalwood. And I love incense, because as soon as I smell special incense for the tea room, I mean, I feel like I'm in Kyoto, back in the training school. And it has the same purpose that in church ritual, it is to purify the room and to say this is a sacred space, this is a special space. So, but again, it's all very, during the winter months, we use a kettle that's down in a hearth, and you use a different kind of incense, a kind of kneaded incense, this kind of more sticky. Has a heavier smell, but that's good for winter. But I love sandalwood, because I think it's very fresh and permanent. Yes. Oh, yes, and we have a special gift for you. Yes, if you'd like one. And this is your treasure each moment and cherish each encounter. And these were cut at our IQ Center because, 3D printing and laser printing is very popular these days. So we have an IQ Center at WNL, which does wonderful things. It's in the shape of a plum blossom. And the plum is symbolic because the plum is part of an Asian triad, not only Japan, but China and Korea. And so you have the bamboo, you have the pine, and you have the plum. And they are known as an auspicious triad because we try to live our lives like the bamboo and the pine and the plum. The pine bends, but it doesn't break. It's very resilient. We actually have a little bamboo grove in our backyard, and a storm will come by, and they're all like this, and the next day, they're all like this, right? Bamboo is very resilient. Pine is evergreen, is ever constant. And then plum, unlike cherry blossoms scatter, right? One wind or torrential rain and the cherry blossoms scatter, and they're appreciated for that idea of impermanent beauty. Plum is not. The plum is tenacious. The plum blooms early, at the end of winter, beginning of spring. In Asian painting, the plum is often depicted with snow. So this beautiful, delicate blossom, but it's fine. Even though the snow and the elements, my husband just took one, I don't know. But anyways, the plum. So, why don't we try, another secret to university teaching these days is we're teaching resilience. I don't know how you were raised, but my father said, you're going to school unless I see blood. So, I just went to school. So, but, we have a very different kind of generation, and I think we really have to talk about not only mental resilience, but just sort of, but they have a lot more to deal with. I do agree. They do have a lot. We didn't have COVID when I went to school. They have a lot more to deal with. So we talk a lot about, so there's a lot to learn from tea. Yes?
In Japan, or in Japanese communities, among the people who participate regularly in tea ceremony, is it primarily women, primarily men, or is it reasonably 60, 40, 40, 60?
I'm glad you asked the question. No, it is high 90s women. It is a huge percentage of women. But the irony, it's a medieval art where the tea school, the Grand Master only is succeeded by a son.
Yes.
So, and I think there's one flower, Ikebana school, that has changed that. But I think tea, confronted with the 21st century, has to really rethink some of those things. So you're thinking, what if they don't have a son? That's actually a great solution. You adopt your best disciple, or you have someone marry your daughter. So are the bloodlines unbroken? No, they're not. They're broken. But the idea that, I think one thing that bothered me, and I was a young 21-year-old American, and what do I know? I wasn't there to change the system, but I did question it in the back of my mind, is, when all the teachers would line up, we would greet the Grand Master on the 1st of every month, formal kimono, sitting there, waiting for him to arrive with his family. It's a medieval world. When they enter, you sit a different way. You sit actually like a retainer. I mean, there are all these rules, and it's kind of romantic. I kind of liked it, It's like, I didn't think I would stay there forever, so. But all the male teachers would always come in before very capable women teachers. That there is a core of teachers, you can call them your full professors, that are only men. And I think the tea school has to really start to rethink some of these things, because they are losing followers. I don't think it's going to appeal to this younger generation of Japanese. So I am looking to the current Grand Master, the 16th Grand Master, who was a college kid when I was there. He happened to marry a niece of the retired emperor, so we've got an imperial connection. She didn't take a backseat to anyone. So I'm looking to her, but because the 99-year-old retired Grand Master is still alive, they're keeping it very, very traditional, but I'm thinking it could change, right, in another few years or so.
Remarkable that Washington and Lee.
Pardon
and
me?
my husband is a Washington and Lee graduate.
Oh, thank you.
And
Wonderful.
he doesn't have any problem with working with women.
Okay.
But he graduated a long time ago, and you said it was in the 60s that the tea room was given?
2006. 2006.
2000.
Right,
Okay.
right. So it hasn't been around that long. But I had a sort of experience with that. I just taught a Lit 221 class, which is my great books. I take them from the Tale of Genji to current times. I had all men. What was it? I had 15 young men. And nice young men, but it's just you didn't have the variety there. It was a little bit of a challenge, but it was fun to sort of step back in time and sort of see that dynamic. But we have wonderful, wonderful students who want to explore the world. And what I say is you don't have to leave. You can take a course on campus, and there are other courses that will sort of open your mind to new things. And so I just want to hope that, as your little magnet says, Ichigo Ichie, I hope you leave with that today, that you treasure each moment and cherish the encounter.
I just had one final question. How do you thank the host?
The bowing. So maybe I can have everybody come out and you can thank them. That'd be great. Let me see, they're probably busy. They're probably busy watching people. Washington and Lee, I'm really proud to work with this group. Again, we are a club, right? We are an organization, and we have 3 students. Eli is graduating. Ashlyn is going to Italy, study abroad. Ashley is going to Japan for a year. In our back, we have Jonathan, who is a physics professor at another university. who's a wonderful help. And see, one thing with non-students is they don't graduate and leave. They stay, which I love. We have an alum. Right, someone I've known since she was a first year, Gabby from the class of 2015. Oh my gosh, we go back. We go back. Although she says there are certain places on campus she can't go into because of assignments I made in class. That's another story. And then we have Futa Ikeda, who has the same last name as mine, but who is not my son, but could be my son, who also helps. So I really thank them for all the work they do and all the wonderful presentations that we're able to share with people. Please come to WNL, and if you can't, I hope you listen to my podcast. If I can get everything together, if I can get that music into the podcast. And